particular, irreversible vulnerability of a person who had trusted someone enough not to protect themselves. "All right," she said after a moment. She turned to a fresh page. He kept talking. That was the thing about people. Once they finally started, once the careful architecture of composure developed its first crack, the rest tended to follow. Talon had learned to simply hold the space and let it happen. And so she sat with her notepad and her pen and let Lara talk. And the city darkened quietly behind the glass, and the whiskey went slowly down in both their glasses, and the room held the particular charged stillness of a place where something true was being said aloud, possibly for the first time. "The worst of it," he said, "is not the distance. The distance I could learn to carry distance, I think. Distance is at least honest. Distance says there is space between us. What she does is something else." He turned his glass. "She manufactures warmth when she needs something from me. She can turn it on, the laugh, the touch, the way she used to look at me. And I know while it's happening that it isn't real, and I respond to it anyway, because the hunger for it is stronger than intermittent reinforcement." She stopped writing for a moment, because she was watching his face. He was holding it. Whatever was moving through him, with the focused effort of a man gripping something at the edge of a drop. She could see it in the line of his jaw, the stillness that was not peace, but its opposite. The absolute muscular concentration of someone refusing to come apart in front of another person. She had seen people cry in this office. She had handed across the box of tissues that lived in the bottom drawer of her desk more times than she could count. But something about watching Lara hold himself together with both hands This man, who had always moved through the world with such quiet ease, such unhurried grace, produced in her a feeling she did not immediately have a word for, something that sat behind her sternum and pressed. She looked back at her notepad. The children, he began, and stopped. The word landed differently than the others. We talked about it, he said after a moment. Early on, often. I wanted. He stopped again. His jaw tightened. I wanted a family. I want a family. That has not changed. He was choosing every word now with great care. The way you move through a room in the dark. But there was always a reason. Always a next year, a wrong time, a project at a critical stage, a trip she couldn't cancel, and I accommodated it. I told myself she would be ready when she was ready. I told myself I was being patient when maybe I was being. He exhaled. Maybe I was being deceived. The pressing feeling behind her sternum intensified. She thought involuntarily of a woman who had found reasons, who had kept something from a man who had wanted it with his whole self, and had dressed those reasons in the language of timing, of practicality, of love that simply needed more time before it was ready to expand. She thought about 6 years of not yet, and what a person did with the grief of a life that had not been allowed to happen. Tell me about the financial picture, she said, as best you understand it. He reached down to the sling bag at his feet. I was when you saw me this morning. I was on my way to our accountant's office. He produced a folder, and then another, and set them on the table between them. I'd asked for a full summary, personal and business, both sides. Talon set her notepad aside and picked up the first folder. She opened it, began to read. Lara kept talking. Something about the apartment they owned jointly, the investment account, his engineering practices valuation, and she moved through the pages with the clean efficiency of someone reading a language they are entirely fluent in. Columns of figures, asset schedules, company valuations, a property portfolio attached to a name she didn't recognize at first, and then did. Vanessa Metropolis, Sole Director, Meridian Freight Solutions, LLC. She turned a page, turned another. Her expression did not change. She was aware, in some peripheral way, that Lara was still talking. His voice moving through the room with that same exhausted, careful honesty, describing the texture of a life coming apart at its seams. And she was aware that she was nodding at the appropriate intervals, and that her face was doing its job. But her eyes were moving through these figures, and her mind was doing the rapid, practiced arithmetic of a young woman who had seen a great many financial disclosures, and what the arithmetic was producing was a number she had not expected. She turned to the personal net worth summary on the last page of the second folder. Lara's column, Vanessa's column. She read it twice, 10 times, give or take. The shipping company alone, Meridian Freight, privately held. Most recent valuation attached was worth more than everything Lara owned combined, and then multiplied, and then some. Property in her name, offshore holdings, a subsidiary registered in Cyprus that had no explanation attached to it in these documents, and whose existence, in Talon's professional experience, was never accidental. She closed the folder. Lara, she kept her voice even. Why did she not sign a prenuptial agreement? He looked at her with the eyes of a man who has asked himself this question in the dark many times. Because we were in love, he said, simply, finally, as if the sentence contained within it every decision and every consequence and every version of a future that had turned out differently than it was supposed to. Because I was standing in front of the woman I wanted to spend my life with, and the idea of handing her a document that began with the assumption that we might fail. He shook his head. It felt like a betrayal of everything I believed about us, about what we were. He paused. I never imagined it would come to this. You don't. You can't. If you could imagine it, you wouldn't do any of it. And then, quietly, without drama, without any of the warning signs she might have caught and prepared herself for, he stopped speaking. His head dropped slightly, and he cried. Not loudly, not with the heaving, self-conscious grief of someone performing sorrow for an audience. He cried the way strong people cry when they have held something too long and their hands have simply given out. Silently, the tears moving down the planes of that extraordinary face. His jaw still set, his shoulders still squared, as though his body had decided to weep, while the rest of him was still trying to maintain the pretense that it wouldn't. Talon sat very still. She did not know what to do. This was not a sentence she permitted herself often. She nearly always knew what to do. But she sat across from him and felt the complete inadequacy of professional distance, and did not know what to do with the ache that had opened up in the middle of her chest, like a door she had not unlocked herself. She put down her pen, and she reached across the table and placed her hand on his knee. He looked down at her hand, and then he covered it with both of his, held it with the firm, certain grip of a man holding the one solid thing in a tilting room. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She let him hold her hand in both of his, and after a moment she leaned forward, and with her other hand she touched his face gently, the way you touch something precious. and brushed the tears from his cheek and looked into those soft brown eyes that were still the most honest eyes she had ever sat across from, and said quietly, "It's going to be all right." He held her gaze. The city glittered behind the glass. "I just want to be free of it," he said. His voice was rough at the edges. "I don't want. I'm not angry. I'm not looking for war. I just want to put it down. I want to walk away from the suffering and start again. Start clean." He paused. "Is that possible?" Talon sat back slowly, her hand still in his for a moment before it returned to her lap. "You've come to exactly the right place for that," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and then something shifted in his expression, moving back through time, the way his face sometimes did, toward something older and warmer. "You know what I remember," he said softly. "I remember thinking back then that you were the most quietly extraordinary person I had ever met. Not the sharpest, not the most ambitious, though you were both of those things. But there was something in you, a stillness underneath all the fire that made a room feel different when you were in it." Talon said nothing. She was listening. "I used to watch you in the library," he said, and the ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You never knew I was watching. You would be reading with your chin in your hand, and you would have this look like the whole world was in that book, and you were deciding what to do with it." He shook his head gently. "I thought whoever ends up being loved by that woman is the luckiest person alive." The warmth moved through her slow and deep, like the whiskey, like October light. She held it quietly, the way she held the things she didn't want to look at too directly, in case they disappeared. "There's paperwork," she said, "and a deposit." She said it the way she said most things, cleanly, without apology. But then she paused and looked at him and added, "Don't worry about it tonight." Lara looked at her with mild surprise, and she felt it too. The small internal register of a thing said that had not been said before. Not once. Not to anyone who had sat in that chair. She picked up her pen and let it pass without comment. "I'll serve Vanessa with a notice of deposition," she continued, her voice back on solid ground. "No prenup means the court has more discretion, which cuts both ways. But I know how to frame a petition, and I know which judges move quickly when the paperwork is clean. A few weeks if we push for expedited proceedings. Wrap this up before it gets ugly." "I would like that very much," he said quietly. A beat. "Talon." His voice had changed register, softer now, back in that older place. "I meant it." She looked up from her notepad. "Meant what?" His eyes held hers. "When I said I would have liked it to be me, the one who got to know you properly." A pause. "I meant that." The room was very quiet. "I know," she said. They stood at the same moment, the way people sometimes do when a conversation has reached its natural weight limit. And she walked him to reception, her heels quiet on the hardwood, the city still burning behind the glass. At the elevator, she turned to face him, and he opened his arms and she moved into them, her chin briefly at his shoulder, his coat still carrying that cedar and warmth that she had by now filed under "Do not examine further." She turned her face. Some instinct, some half-formed intention she hadn't fully authorized. And so did he. And the distance between the gesture and its consequence collapsed in less than a second. His lips on hers. 1 second, barely that. They pulled back. "I'm sorry," he said. He looked it mostly, and then, before she had fully reassembled her expression, before the professional composure had completed its restoration, he kissed her again, deliberately this time, slowly, a hand at her jaw, certain and unhurried, and the quiet confidence of a man who has decided something and decided it fully. He stepped back. His eyes were warm. "I still owe you for that first date," he said softly, and walked into the elevator. The doors closed. Talon stood in her own reception, with her fingertips at her lips, and her heart conducting itself in a manner she found completely unacceptable. She was angry at herself for days, productively angry, the kind that generates output. She arrived before 7 each morning, delegated her pending caseload to her senior associates with the brisk efficiency of someone clearing a desk before a storm, and turned the full weight of Voss and Associates toward a single file. Agatha v. Metropolis. She had it printed and tabbed and cross-referenced within 48 hours, and what it told her, the deeper she went, was a story that had very little to do with a failing marriage, and a great deal to do with architecture. Vanessa's finances were structured, not in the way that wealth is naturally structured over time, but in the deliberate, considered way of someone who had thought carefully at some prior point about what belonged to them and what didn't. Meridian Freight moved money the way water moves through good pipe, efficiently, quietly, in directions that served the design. The Cyprus subsidiary appeared again in business filings, unremarked, and beside it, in the transfer records, was a pattern of timing that made the back of Talon's neck go still. The couple burned through joint funds at a rate that should have produced anxiety, and somehow never touched Vanessa's personal ledger at all. Every shared expense ran through accounts that held Lara's name at least as prominently as hers. Every significant asset in Vanessa's column had been acquired or transferred or restructured in the 18 months prior to their marriage. Someone had thought about this, Talon thought, before the wedding. Someone had drawn a line between mine and ours before the ink was dry on the invitation list, and the man in the hotel 2 blocks away, the one who had said, because we were in love, with the absolute ruinous conviction of someone who had believed it completely, had never seen it. The anger at herself became something quieter and harder, more purposeful. She called him in the evenings. He called her late at night. From the hotel room where he was methodically reconstructing his sense of himself from the ground up. And she sat in her apartment in the dark, with her legs curled beneath her, and talked to him the way she had not talked to anyone in years, easily, without performance. The way you talk to someone who already knows the version of you that existed before you became so careful. They had coffee at Augusto's on a Thursday. Again the following Tuesday. She told herself it was case management. She also told herself a number of other things she didn't fully believe. The night before the deposition, he missed their afternoon meeting. A message at 2:15. Cricket ran long. Incredibly sorry. Could you come to the hotel this evening? We can go through everything over dinner. Full focus, I promise. She read it twice, wrote and deleted a response, wrote it again. Fine. 8 o'clock. She told herself the concern she felt about the setting was professional. She told herself the small, warm, treacherous thing underneath the concern was not worth examining. She put on her coat and went anyway, because Lara needed to be prepared, and because she was good at her job, and she was still telling herself this in the elevator on the way up to the 14th floor. He opened the door in a robe. His hair was damp. He smelled like hotel soap and something warm underneath it. And he looked, standing in the doorway with his jaw still carrying the remnants of a day outdoors, and his eyes slightly bright from exercise, profoundly, inconveniently good. Just got out the shower, he said. Late match. Come in. She walked past him into the suite. You still play cricket? My name doesn't exactly give me a choice. She turned. What does that mean? He looked at her with the expression of a man confronting an unexpected gap in someone's education. Brian Lara, he said, as though it resolved everything. She looked at him. Brian Lara, he repeated. Greatest batsman. He stopped, shook his head, beginning to smile. Never mind. Enlighten me. I'll explain after the deposition. He gestured toward the suite's dining area. A small, round glass table beside the window. 2 chairs angled close. Should I get dressed? She looked at him, at the robe, at the line of his collarbone where it opened at the throat, at the particular way he was standing, relaxed and warm and entirely at ease in his own skin. And she thought, with the small, clinical part of her brain that was still functioning correctly. Yes, obviously, without question. Whatever you're comfortable with, she said. They sat close at the small table, closer than her office chairs, closer than the coffee bar, close in the way that hotel rooms make things close whether you intend it or not. She had her laptop open and the file tabbed beside it, and she walked him through it with the focused precision of someone who had prepared this material until she knew it from the bone outward. What to expect from opposing counsel, how Vanessa's team would attempt to frame the asset question, what answers to give, what silences to hold, how to look when something landed that was designed to destabilize him. He listened well. He always did. But the glass table was transparent, and she was aware, with increasing and inconvenient frequency, of his thigh beside hers. The robe, the way the lamplight fell across the room with a warmth that had nothing to do with case preparation. She kept her eyes on the screen, kept her voice level, turned a page, turned another. She was mid-sentence. Something about the order of questioning, the sequence of financial disclosures. When she stopped, she looked at him, at this man who had walked back into her life on a Tuesday morning and proceeded, in the weeks since, to be quietly, consistently, entirely himself, passionate and pained and honest to a degree that made most of the people she knew seem like rough drafts. She heard herself say, quietly, to no one in particular, "What am I doing here?" Lara opened his mouth. She kissed him. She knew, the moment she did it, exactly why she had. Not because the line between them had been blurring for weeks, though it had. Not because the hotel room was warm and the city was dark and his collarbone was right there, though all of that was true. She kissed him because it had been a very long time since she had done something that wasn't measured, wasn't strategic, wasn't the considered output of a woman who had arranged her life to within an inch of its life. She kissed him because she was tired of being entirely in control of everything. She kissed him because she watched him sit in her office and weep with the dignity of a man who had felt things all the way through. And she had wanted, badly, in the quiet of her own chest, to feel something that completely for once. And because his skin was familiar in the specific way of something your hands have always known, She pulled back, looked at him. The city waited behind the glass, glittering and indifferent. She was on her feet before the thought had fully formed. The chair scraped back. Her hands found her blouse, pressing the fabric flat with the focused energy of a woman reassembling herself from the outside in, because the inside was going to take considerably longer, and she didn't have the time. We can't do this. Her voice was steady. She was grateful for that. Not now. Not like this. Lara watched her from the chair, his expression open in a way that was almost unbearable to look at directly. When the divorce is final, she said, when you are completely free of this, then she stopped herself. But not now. I won't do it now. He stood. He stood in the way he did everything, without rush, with the quiet deliberateness of a man who had decided something and was no longer in negotiation with himself about it. He crossed the room toward her, and she backed up, and her hand came up and found his chest, her palm flat against the warmth of the robe, feeling the steady, traitorous beat of his heart beneath it. And she held him there. Talon, her name in his mouth, low and certain. I have been in love with you since the second year of university. That is not a thing I discovered recently. That is a thing I have carried for 15 years and set it down in other people's arms and picked back up again every single time, because it was always still there, waiting. He looked at her with those soft, ruinous eyes. Every time something ended, Morocco, Chicago, Vancouver, I would lie awake and think, not about the woman I had just lost, but about the one I never should have left. It was always you. It was only ever you. Her hand was still on his chest. She did not move it. You can't say that, she said quietly. I just did. Lara, my heart has never found the right place because the right place already existed and I was too young and too afraid to stay in it. He reached up and covered her hand with his, the same gesture as the office weeks ago, his hands around hers, and she felt it move through her like a current through water. I left, and I have regretted it every year since, in the specific, private way you regret things you can't explain to anyone because they wouldn't understand why you simply didn't go back. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she took her hand back and stepped away, and the distance she put between them was deliberate and necessary, and cost her something. You vanished, she said. The words came out quieter than she intended. Quieter and more honest, stripped of the professional armor that usually shaped everything she said. She heard them as they left her and did not take them back. You were just gone. No explanation, no conversation. You were there and then you weren't. And I spent a long time wondering what I had done. She looked at the window, the dark city, then back at him. I spent a long time wondering if it was me, if there was something in me that made people. She stopped. I decided eventually that it didn't matter, that I would build something that couldn't leave, something that stayed because it was mine. She pressed her lips together, and I did that. I built all of it. But I want you to understand what the leaving cost. The room held them both in silence. It cost me everything too, he said, in ways I didn't understand until it was too late to go back and say so. She looked at him. This man, this specific man, with his soft eyes and his engineer's hands, and his way of moving through the world, like someone who understood that the best structures were built slowly and with great care, and she thought about 15 years and what they had done to each of them, and what they had left intact. You are the most extraordinary soul I have ever known, she said, and she meant it the way she meant very few things. The way you feel, the depth of you, the way you walk through suffering with your dignity still on. She shook her head. There is no one like you, Lara. There has never been anyone like you for me. She straightened, which is exactly why I have to do this properly. I have to protect you first. I have to do my job. And then she allowed herself briefly one completely unguarded look at him. Then we can talk about the rest. He crossed the distance between them again, and she let him this time. Let him stand close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off him. Close enough that she had to tilt her chin slightly to hold his gaze. I will never leave again, he said quietly. Absolutely. The way load-bearing things are said. And when this is over, when you have done what only you can do, I'm going to ask you to marry me, Talon Voss. The silence that followed was the most complete she had ever inhabited. You need to calm down, she said. He smiled, that low, curtain gap smile. I know what I want, and so do you. She opened her mouth, closed it, felt the heat in her face with the distant academic interest of a woman observing her own physiology betray her. There's something else, he said. The smile softened into something more careful. At Augusto's that morning. What about it? It wasn't an accident. She looked at him. I'd been looking for you for 2 weeks, he said. I knew you were in Seattle. I'd known for years. If I'm honest, I knew the firm, I knew the building. I drove past once, and then again. And then I started going to the coffee bars nearby in the mornings, because I thought he exhaled. I thought if I could just see you from a distance, just know that you were real, and well, that the version of you I'd been carrying was still accurate. A pause, and then there you were, sitting in the window, and everything I'd been rehearsing for 2 weeks went completely out of my head, and I just said your name. She stared at him, flattered, shaken, working very hard to keep both of those things off her face with limited success. You have been following me, she said. I prefer looking for. Lara, I know. He held up both hands, the gesture of a man who is surrendering happily. I know. She looked at him for a long, full moment, at the investment in his face, the absolute, unhedged certainty in his eyes. And then she gathered her laptop and her file and her coat from the chair with the quiet efficiency of a woman who has made a decision and intends to honor it. She crossed to him, rose onto her toes, and kissed him, brief, deliberate, a period at the end of a sentence, then stepped back and became Miss Voss again, composed and directional. Go through the notes, she said at the door. Everything we covered. I want you rested and clear-headed tomorrow. She walked out. The elevator came. She stepped in, and as the doors closed, she faced forward, and the smile that crossed her face was private and slow, and had very little to do with the deposition. She had a plan.